Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of TeaTechnique Editorial Conversations. This is a special bonus episode where we challenge each other to do blending, taking various types of teas from pu'er, various types of pu'er teas, and attempting to create a superior blend in a competition format. Our frequent editor, Patrick Penny, will be the master of ceremonies, and joining us here today are Ryan On. Hello, Ryan.
Hello.
Chris.
Hey, everybody.
And a special guest independent judge, Nancy Lynn.
Hi, everyone.
Over to you, Pat.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll do a real quick intro since Chris has never been, on the podcast before. So we've got Chris MacNitt here. Chris and I have known each other for, 4 years now, something like that. Chris, do you want to tell everyone, to the extent you're allowed to, what you do for a living and just a little bit of your tea background?
Sure. My name is Chris MacNitt. I am the tea development lead at Starbucks. And my tea journey, however, started when I was 8 years old. My parents started a tea company in West Palm Beach, Florida. Obviously, that's where I got my affinity for tea, kind of grew up in their business. By the time I was 12, I was tasting for their buying decisions and really learning at the feet of some of the elite North American tasters. At 19, I joined their business and started developing tea blends with botanicals and teas and flavors, as well as tasting for quality from the importation side. And then about 4.5 years ago, Starbucks approached me to come and do very similar things for Starbucks. And so I do blend development and do a lot of manufacturing and just all sorts of interesting tea things as it relates to Starbucks, both domestically and primarily internationally.
Nice. And just to give some more background, Chris and I have had a chance not only to drink hundreds of sessions of tea together, but to travel to a lot of, tea farms, processing facilities in, China and Korea together. So, we invited Chris because we knew he'd be a challenge in this competition with so much, experience in tea blending. So I think, we're really excited to have him. Without further ado, I'm just going to explain the rules of what we're going to do. So as Jason mentioned, this is a blend off. So we have 4 Mao Cha sourced from our friend Glenn over at Crimson Lotus Tea. The 4 Mao Cha are a 2020 Bulong, a 2020 Kunlu Xiao Chao Mu, a 2018 Manjuan Gushu, and a 2008 Jingmai Mao Cha. So each of the 4 of us received 50 grams of those Mao Cha, and it was our task to make the tastiest blend possible using those 4 teas. Our brewing methodology is going to be using a competition tasting set. We're each brewing 3 grams of each other's designated blend in a competition tasting set for 3 minutes using boiling water. We'll decant the brews 1v1. We're tasting them bracket style. So we're going to have letters to determine, each recipe. And at the end, when we have a winner, we'll reveal which letter of recipe corresponds to, which individual. So I think we'll go ahead with the first setup. We've got letters A versus C. A is a heavily Jingmai leaning recipe, and C is a more Kunlu leaning recipe. All right, you gentlemen ready?
Ready.
Just to confirm, 3 minutes, right?
We are doing 3 minutes. This will be the episode with all the clicking and clacking in the background.
We finally sound like a normal tea podcast.
That's true. So yeah, we never really, we're always drinking tea. We're just not talking about brewing tea.
No, I mean, we're normally not clinking and clacking.
That's true. That's good. We'll join the upper echelons. All right. And so I've got a good 2.5 minutes left on my brew time. Before we had started the conversation today, Chris was joining us for the first time, and Ryan actually had a really good question for him. Ryan, did you want to ask again, just so Chris can kind of share this information for all of our listeners?
Yeah, so as a novice blender who has very little experience on my side, I was trying to develop a good framework for doing this well. And I was asking Chris what his framework was when he was doing blending and how he approaches it.
So yeah, in this particular instance, I think it's unique, and it's always when I teach blending to folks, I generally talk about beginning with the end in mind. So what do you want to accomplish with the blend, and therefore generally end up making compromises on what that like idealized version in your head is. But if you create that target in your mind and then try and find the things that can come together and iterate towards that particular objective, then you get a really good baseline. And the way that you kind of develop that particular finished blend thought or finished blend style is obviously tasting each of the teas independently of one another. I generally do it multiple times. And so like I always say, like, begin with the end in mind, whether it's this sort of straight tea blending or whether it's the more traditional Americanized tea and botanicals and flavors sort of blending. Both of them require you to have kind of a thought process and kind of an idealized finished product in your head that you're trying to target.
Ryan, how different is that from what you think you did?
It was definitely a process of discovery. I wasn't really even thinking about the end. I was seeing, what flavors could I get, and trying to pick out the best ones and drift it in that direction. So it was, very different framework. But I think beginning with the end in mind would have been much better for my blending experience for doing these.
Jason, how did you go about yours?
I went entirely empirical. I brewed each tea independently and did wet blending and just kept doing different combinations. I decided early on to drop one of the teas from consideration, so it was just 3 teas. And so I used a triangular 3-variable ternary plot in order to continuously plot what was getting better and what was getting worse. Maybe it worked. We'll see.
Nice.
I think that that's interesting. And then how would you have defined what was your methodology to define what gets better and what gets worse?
Just pure tasting, just blend, taste, blend, taste, blend, taste, and I would just shade in on the little triangle plot what was getting better and what was getting worse.
All right. So I'd say trying to take into account not just the taste, obviously, but the aroma. Mine just finished, so I'm about to get tasting now. Yeah, Jason, that's a really nice empirical approach. I think mine sounds a lot more similar to Chris, and it's funny because while we both do blending work together, I didn't, directly learn from Chris. Chris didn't directly learn from me or anything like that. So it's funny how much, our styles overlap. Although, not to give you no credit, I definitely did learn a lot of things from you. But I definitely started with a goal in mind with what I wanted. I tasted all the teas, kind of 6 grams in 100 milliliter gaiwan, gongfu style. Then I tasted them all with the methodology that we're brewing today. And then I started with wet blending. So just brewed up each tea 3 grams in a Pingbi Bay, and then just started, pipetting into cups, the ratio that I wanted. And then from there, slowly my plot, the plot thickened, my brew got better and better. I started with a really different profile in mind, actually. And as I started to blend, it kind of shifted the concept of what I wanted to achieve based on what the teas were doing together. I really actually started trying to go for a very punchy, young, kind of brash brew, because I thought, well, if it's way stronger than the other tea, that is one way to win, right? If it just like totally overpowers the taste of the other tea. But just based on the teas that we had, I decided to lean in the totally opposite direction and just went for like smooth, integrated, some aged taste. And that's kind of just where it led me. So hopefully we'll see how far it gets me today. So I think maybe it'll be beneficial for us to kind of talk about the things that we like, maybe want more from each of the blends. So we're tasting A versus C. Jason, I see you taking great notes over there. Did you want to talk a little bit about what you like in each blend?
I haven't started tasting it. I'm still just taking notes on the aroma.
So Chris, I think you're asking, Ryan, did you go about just like totally dry blending through different iterations, or did you approach it through wet blending as well?
No, I did wet blending. So I tasted each tea independently. I did some 50-50 blends just to get comfortable, and then I just did wet blending.
And I don't know, Chris, maybe it'll be useful for you to explain to the audience. I don't think a lot of people who listen to us have a lot of knowledge with blending. What is wet blending?
So wet blending is kind of a methodology. I always view it as like a pre-step that you do where you brew out all of the ingredients that you're going to put in the blend. So in this case, you brew out all the teas to the same methodology that obviously this competition would be done at. And then you do kind of parts. So you'll add a little bit of TX liquor with a little bit of TY liquor with a little bit of TZ liquor, and you'll kind of come to an understanding of what those different parts and pieces can work together. One thing that I will say is that what I've found with with tea blending specifically is the sum seems to always end up being greater than them combined is greater than just the sum of the parts. And so you really in blending generally, you actually like to let tea blends rest for a little bit so that they can kind of come to a homeostasis with one another and find that more homogenized flavor. I think it elevates it. Obviously, in more of like a competition setting, that's not necessarily what is possible, but like really, really fascinating kind of way in which blends kind of come together. But wet blending is a great way to kind of initially evaluate lots of different variables quickly and get to kind of approximate blend percentage to then start doing the physical dry blending.
And I like that point that you were taking, that the blend should be greater than the sum of its parts, right? I think Jason, Ryan, and I have a phrase that we picked up: 1 + 1 = 3, where everything should come together in such a way that the outcome is greater than what any of the parts could have been, and that's kind of what we're all aiming for here with blending. Your point on blends coming together, that's something that definitely, being in the industry, it took me a while to realize how that works. We use the term, blend marriages, the flavors marriage. And so, today we're not doing that, but hopefully some of these blends will taste well integrated based on, how much work we all put into them. So it looks like everyone's got a good bit of tasting going on. Ryan, Chris, Jason, either of you feel, qualified to talk on the things you liked about any of these?
I think blend A is surprisingly complex. It's warming. It has a nuanced aroma. It holds up well. And C, to me, is very mild and soft. I think that it's interestingly balanced, but it doesn't have quite the overall effect of A so far.
Any thoughts, either agreeing or disagreeing? Different qualities that you noticed when you were tasting it, anyone?
I agree with Jason that A is very complex. It had almost like a Shagwan-like smokiness and depth and complexity and astringency, which I really liked. I thought C was super balanced. C was definitely more balanced than A. Like if you were to do a consumer test, I think C would definitely win. It is not very astringent, not bitter, super floral, super friendly, very fruity. So actually, I think they're both really great blends. I think it just sort of depends on where you sit in type of pu'er that you generally like.
And this will be the interesting thing at the end, because I completely agree with both of you guys on the iterations. One other thing is I think there's a really nice leveraging of the astringency in A, that for those of us who really like astringency, Darjeeling drinkers in the house. And so when you kind of play in that world and pump up the astringency, sometimes it can be like really pleasant and add certain dynamics to the tea. But interestingly enough, for these blends, I can see two completely different thought processes behind how you accomplish these with, the same 3 teas create 2 drastically different. Like, I wish I had a shot of the cups so that people could see like the cup, the liquor color difference here. But like it's a wide range here, and you wouldn't necessarily know that that's possible.
I think that's good to point out, since this is, an auditory medium, right? These 2-letter blends, A and C, both use Jingmai, both use Manjuan, both use Kunlu, neither use Bulong. The proportions aren't so different, but here the cup color of A is a really dark soupy orange, and C just is a little bit brighter, a little bit closer tint of kind of gold. And Ryan, just maybe for the podcast sake, take a picture of yours, and maybe we can use that as the cover shot. So since just to peel back behind the curtain, I know which letter recipe is whose teas. I'm not going to comment on it. The rest of the participants do not know, which letter corresponds to which participant. So I will refrain from commenting just to make sure I don't bias anyone. With that, our objective judge is here still tasting. Nancy, what are your thoughts? And then after you give a little bit of thought, which one do you think should move on?
I agree with Ryan in that C is tastes more balanced to me, more structured. Maybe not like more interesting than A, but it was like a nice cup of tea. Very there's just some slight bitter notes. Some of the fruity notes came through. It was just like very balanced. And the first one, when I first took a sip, was actually had that sour punch that I didn't particularly like. And after a few sips, it kind of went away, and so my tongue got used to it. But I did like that A had some longevity to it. Like after the sip, it kind of the sweet and the sourness kind of lingered for a little while.
All right. So if you had to give it to someone, A or C?
I think maybe C.
So I know the people who are in the competition, but I'll still ask for everyone's vote, and then I will tally up the ones that are not in the competition, right? So, and I think I will probably abstain, right? Is that probably the best to do?
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
So it's 3 votes per round.
Okay. All right. So Chris, A or C?
I'm going to go with A.
Okay. Chris is going A. Nancy went C. Jason?
A.
And Ryan?
Sorry, I was on mute. A.
All right. Well, looking at who is in the competition and who is not, A wins out by 1 vote. So A will move on. Nancy, I also loved C, but unfortunately, C is not moving on. So it looks like A will move up the bracket, and we'll reveal later whose blend is A, who's a C. But for now, we'll try and keep it unbiased. Keep all of our listeners on their toes. All right, so the next one we're going to blend up is B versus D. I'm going to drop in the chat what is what, and I'll probably at the same time actually say it just for our listeners at home. If they wanted to make any of these blends, they can just go to crimsonlotus.com. I think most of these matcha are available on the site. And who knows, maybe we'll talk to Glenn about getting Glenn on here, and maybe we'll take our winning blend and try and have it go one-on-one with a blend that he makes out of these 4 matcha, and maybe there'll be a cake out of it. Let's see.
Has to be the same matcha. We're not going toe-to-toe with Glenn and anything he wants to use.
No, we'll get dominated. So we'll have to have him use the same 4 for sure. Even then, we'll probably still be blown out of the water. All right, so I'm just typing in the chat now. Okay, so B's recipe, 1.5 grams of Jingmai, 0.75 grams of Manjuan, 0.375 grams of Kunlu, 0.375 grams of Bulong, and for anyone whose scale does not go up to 3 decimal places, which is all of us, I'd say round up to 0.38 for both of those. Or 3.7 for one and 3.8 for the other to keep the gram count consistent. I'm now typing D in the chat. Okay, D is 1.5 grams Jingmai, 0.5 grams Manjuan, 1 gram Kunlu. Some of these leaves are so huge that it's hard to hit that like spot on gram weight.
I was unsure whether or not breakage would be whether breakage was gonna be required.
Yeah,
I
had to search through for quite a while to try and find like not totally destroyed pieces that'll give me the right gram count. I'm trying not to like mess it up by having anything be too astringent because I broke things. We might be doing a podcast first. I don't know if I've heard too many people do like live blending on podcasts. Obviously, like the actual blending part will be probably edited out, but you feel like you've listened to anything like this where we did like a blend off?
No, and I also think that whoever did 0.375 is evil. Like, I feel like that's like single leak. Like, let me just dig through the bag and find the right leak.
Wow, that's what's taken all of us so long. You know, we'll be able to, you know, give glory to the winners, crap on the losers, complain about everyone else once we reveal, you know, whose thing is who.
I'm concerned for B that there might be some like measurement bias here where it's like, I don't want to have to measure that out again.
D. And my wastewater bowl is just going to be so full of like leaves. Imagine just taking a sip of one of these. I was thinking about saving everything and just like having a super gaiwan later, just like, you know, maybe after we get off, just sitting there drinking what is going to probably be like 20 grams of tea for the rest of the day. And then I decided, no, just dump it in a wastewater bowl. Doing this definitely like makes me respect all of the you know, Western pu'er vendors who do so much work on the ground blending. Because like I spent probably like I probably spent about 2 hours tasting all the teas, dialing in my blend. And after doing that, man, my stomach hurts so much after drinking so much of these, like, you know, sharp young pu'ers. I kept going for the Jingmai after because I was just like, oh, I need the Jingmai to settle my stomach.
That's why I was late. Like, after I finished my blend, I'm like, I'm gonna go eat something before this competition.
Chris, I wanted to ask a little bit of a fun question. I don't know if this will resonate with you at all, but when you're doing blend work, is there any time you feel inspired by any other art or, you know, like I think, for example, do you ever feel like a composer and you try and like get into that zone where you feel like you're writing, you know, a symphony? Do you ever try and kind of go into a different world and feel like you're not just blending tea, but you're putting together some other kind of masterpiece?
I don't know if that's necessarily my particular methodology, because I think it's similar in the vein of, I just view it as like a pure expression of just creativity in and of itself. And in like, and one of the things that I think about is like, we got 4 T's to choose from, right? And people would think that that's such like a limiting factor, but I view kind of that choice as merely a boundary within which there is like an infinite number of ways in which you can go about constructing the blend, and just so many choices and options. And so it's like, yes, we have the boundary of just having the 4 T's, but that boundary gives opportunities for, you know, that creative expression. So in a way, I view it not dissimilar to like a mixologist or a you know, chef or a composer or a visual artist or, you know, a writer, right? They all come from very similar from very similar spaces, and that, you know, we are all taking in so many things all the time. You know, one of the inspirations for me really early on was those, you know, those chocolate oranges that you get at Christmas and you can smash them and they like break into like little shards. and like that was a source of inspiration for me. And I've gone and, you know, cupped things. I mean, when we were in Korea, Pat, and like tasting the halabong, that reframes how you think about ways that you can develop and blend. And so those sorts of applications can be done in tea blends, and so very much that creative expression. But I love the idea of like, I'm boxed in, but within that being boxed in, there's this sort of like infinite space to kind of play around with, even though it's like a limiting factor, as it were.
Yeah, I love that. I think, you know, as you said, like 4 teas can sound like very few. I think to some people they can feel like a lot. As we were going through and doing this blending, like, you know, I was trying to incorporate all of them. And like you said, just like a chef, eventually kind of you recognize maybe some ingredients aren't actually adding to the whole or to my vision. And so there's really something to having that limitation, which forces you to get as creative as possible within those boundaries. So I had, you know, just 4 teas, the permutations, right, that you can add them all together, you know, feels like it's near infinity when it's just one human being working on it. So there really was a lot here, and some of these blends are extremely different. It is interesting to see, you know, as I have all of our recipes in front of us, we did all lean to some of the same profiles, even though just tasting A and C, they tasted quite different. But looking at the recipes, they're not extremely different. And so I think that maybe speaks to our preferences. All of us are pu'er drinkers. You know, Chris, you love pu'er tea. We've drank a lot of pu'er together. And so maybe this, you know, the way the recipes split really speak to our personal preferences. But as we were putting these together, I tasted teas that were so extremely different. You know, if you went heavy on Oolong, heavy on Kunlu, so different than a heavy Jingmai blend. So it was a lot of fun. I'm about to start my next brew. I'll let someone else maybe take the floor on that discussion. If anyone else feels like when they were putting the teas together, they were kind of trying to channel some other you know, creative outlet, whether that's kind of writing, art. Any other thoughts on that?
Not really. Although I do think that this was a great experience, and me realizing how, one, incredibly slow this process is and how hard it is. It's after an hour passed, I was like, wow, I've got like 2 data points in my head, like on how to move forward with this blend.
I think we definitely all appreciate the vendors that put in a lot of work to make good blends after trying this ourselves.
Absolutely.
Though I will say, to both their credit and not to diminish the complexity of the work, as you do this often enough, you kind of get into a rhythm where it becomes a bit second nature. And it just becomes easier to formulate to conceptualize and formulate in sort of like a paper concept way, and then kind of maybe skip some steps, like maybe not as much water blend, you know, liquid blending, wet blending as you would necessarily do early on. So the more experience, like with anything, more experience, the faster it goes, and you can kind of skip some steps in your head.
Yeah, I have an anecdote to go along with that. I can't provide too many details because it has to do with where we work, but I think, Chris, you and I had a project deadline for one specific blend, and things got really flipped up. And I said, all right, well, like, Chris, do you want to take this? And you're like, oh, I already have a recipe. And I'm like, what? They just told us. And you're like, no, I already have a recipe. It was something like an English breakfast. And you know, I went to the cupping room and tasted it with you. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, that's done. That's an English breakfast. You just had it in your head. You already knew, you know. There were ingredients you hadn't tasted before either, but you knew the regions. You generally knew the farm. You were like, all right, I got it.
Well, yeah. And this is one of the funny things, and like, not to get too far afield out of the blending space, but when you're working abroad and kind of within the tea industry, people view their like suppliers and the gardens that they work with or their vendors as like sacred, as this like, you know, sacred cow. And we were tasting teas to go into a blend once, and they were like, they wouldn't tell us what farm it was from. And I was like, okay, so this one is from Tonganaganon. And I just started listing off the like farms, because the things we think are sacred cows are not as sacred as we would like to think that they are when it comes to like these very specific profiles that come from different places. And, you know, even within an origin like Assam or Nilgiri, the garden to garden variation is diverse enough that you can learn it and be able to like pick them out of a lineup. And so, you know, working with other people and them, you know, looking at it as like a sacred cow that they can't share with me. And it's like, oh, Pat and I go and taste, and this is garden this is garden that, this is garden Z.
Yeah. And that's still a skill I'm learning from you. For China, Taiwan, I can do it pretty decently, but for all the Indian teas, it's been pretty fascinating to watch you as we go to different manufacturers, and they, as you're saying, don't want to reveal their supply chain. It's been pretty awesome to watch you taste it and go, oh, I know what farm this is from, and I think you haven't been proven wrong yet.
Yeah, and I would say that, you know, that's one of the interesting things from like so there's kind of this within the North American tea industry. I see there's kind of like two different sects. There's the enthusiast, like the hardcore enthusiasts who want to have as much knowledge as possible, and then there's like more like the industry people. I don't view like either are critical to North American tea culture, as it were. But what I find generally is the tea enthusiasts, the hardcore people who are super passionate about tea, and it's a passion, not a business for them, are so much more well-versed in the teas of the Far East, the Taiwans, the Japans, the Chinas. And a lot of the industry folks are more well-versed in African teas and Indian teas and Sri Lankan teas. And so you get this really interesting kind of crossover in certain spaces and areas where you have people who, you know, have kind of a diverse range of taste and interest. And so it's kind of when you can harmonize those, like work in the business and also, you know, be passionate about tea, you know, as a beverage in and of itself, I think it's kind of the best of both worlds.
I think that's a really interesting juxtaposition, because that's definitely resonates with me. My focus wasn't completely on Eastern tea until working in the tea industry. It's funny to hear that though, because Jason, your tea journey started in India, didn't it?
China first, and then I went to India. China in 2007, India in 2008, and then back to China in 2009, Taiwan 2010. India was quite different. I mean, I was exclusively in Darjeeling, and I was really only on Makabari tea plantation. Although I did get to try a bunch of the other large houses and explore anything around Maesong area. But it was very, very limited to like the high mountain Darjeeling region. I still have great memories, great recollections of all that. But up until very recently, I didn't really buy many or any Indian teas again. And then, you know, we all decided to go in on one supplier because they had a nice sample pack. And it was super enjoyable. Is it something I'm going to drink frequently? Probably not. You know, my interest is in Chinese and Taiwanese teas, and the rare occasion that Mr. Hong graces us with his teas, Korean tea. So, you know, it's but it was interesting to go from China to India, and how different the tea industry is, and the difference in what it means to be commercial tea or to be tea that's being sold in the market and commercially.
Well, and to piggyback off of that, think about just the way that India approaches its tea markets, whereas China and Taiwan and Korea and Japan, I always say, when we look at the tea industry as a whole, you have all of these auction spaces in Colombo and in India and Mombasa and in Africa, right? And in a lot of cases, you're dealing with CTCs, you're dealing with lower leaf grades, and you see the, you know, kind of big boys who are the importers doing some sort of more price suppression stuff in the greater tea industry, pushing tea costs below the cost of production, and really squeezing gardens. But you don't necessarily see that in the elite origins of Taiwan and the elite origins of China and Korea and Japan. These are extremely profitable industries. So what I always encourage people, like from a sustainment perspective, is like, how do we start to reinvent, different origins in ways that we can learn from the places where they're doing it well, and they're creating, great teas and profit for everybody in the supply chain, particularly upstream. And how can we model that in places like Kenya, Malawi, India? And so it's a very interesting conundrum, but like the cultural elements that drive these things also very much are indicative of the types of teas that come out of these places as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've started to see some in the past, half decade, some more premiumization of some of the traditionally, orthodox black tea producing regions, orthodox, the wrong term there. Premium teas coming out of places that were classically, right, CTC.
Non-orthodox, yep.
Yeah, non-orthodox. So, you like Kenyan purple tea, right? Kenyan white tea has been becoming a bigger thing in the past couple of years. There's a lot of marketing around that. That's still more commoditization, right? Some more like health benefit and functional claims coming out of that space. But we're starting to see it, and I think it is probably a good way forward for a lot of the farmers, right, to work more into the premium market. I think we're starting to see more direct access between consumers and premium tea farmers versus, I think the auction system, which completely separates the consumers from, the commodity tea harvest market. So Jason, it looks like you're just finishing the teas. I've already tasted both of them. I think Chris, you tasted both of them, right?
Yes, I have.
Ryan, how far along are you?
Just had my first sip of both.
I just decanted one. My other one has another minute on it.
Okay. Sorry to get hit by that chachi.
I also think what it means to be premium tea is quite different in China and Taiwan than it is in India and Sri Lanka. Like the level of what it means to be premium, right? The price per quality, the availability is really different. Because I mean, Makabari, the tea plantations I went to in India, was considered one of the top and set auction records. And it would be pretty hard to find better tea, or at least tea that was so much better it was in a different class than that in India. Whereas in China, there's so many levels, and then you get into the non-commercial teas, right? Like Longjings and stuff. And I think that's a level of both tradition and single-family farms and limited availabilities that doesn't really exist outside of China and Taiwan.
Yeah, 100%. And this is where I find to what Patrick was saying, where they're starting to do like purple tea in Kenya and things like that. And a lot of white teas. And I was doing a tasting with some friends of mine, some industry friends of mine, and we were tasting a bunch of white teas from Kenya. And what we kept saying is like, this is good, but if I were going to get this style of tea, I'd go get it from China, right? And so ultimately, at the end of the day, I think I recognize that, imitation is the highest form of flattery, but these other origins, truly, I think if I were to, and I keep encouraging this, is like, develop your own style, like develop your own thing that is different from what they're doing in China and what they're doing in Japan and Taiwan. And don't try to be like them, because you don't have the same tea. And you need to lean into what your origin gives your teas that is unique and special beyond just trying to replicate what others do, because it just doesn't work. As well,
people talk about the terroir shaping the tea, right? So where like in some cases the cultivar or the varietal has changed, over time with the land, and some teas are just because of the historicity of them. The processing has kind of arisen around a deep understanding of that tea in that land. So like, if we're going to think about I don't know, we'll just go with Wu Yanchas, right? While they might only have about 400 years of history or so, and that's probably still giving them a good bit, but oolong production starting in, the late Ming into the early Qing, that 400 years is still a long time for people to really deeply understand the tea plants that are growing there, to really intuitively develop a processing system that's geared to get the greatest flavors out of those specific tea plants in that specific place. And then when you have forces like, commoditization, colonialization, et cetera, that come and develop a tea industry in a different place, like, Kenya, India, et cetera, there's just not that same understanding, I think, of the land and that same shaping of that tea through, decades and generations of different processing to end up with this kind of ultimate high level product. It's just not really the same. They didn't go through the same evolutions. And so I think you just have very different end stages for both of them.
And it's time, right? Ultimately, the greatest variable for understanding is time. When you have that generational knowledge that's passed down familially, when you're working a farm or processing out leaf or both, you can't substitute that. You can't like, there's a few shortcuts you can do. It's like learning about tea blending. Like, there's a certain aspect of just simply time that gives people who have more time in it the advantage, right? So not that necessarily makes them better or worse, but simply time is a huge factor in all of those sorts of things.
We'll get into the tasting in a second, but I wanted to follow up with that point on time, Chris, because recently we've been talking about how aesthetic is shaped from bottoms up or top down through history, specifically in Chinese tea within our podcast. And recently, Jason was kind of asking how technology might have changed that. How do you think technology, right, might impact the amount of time needed for a specific region to, let's just say move up, right, in the evolutions of their style to reach something that's unique and desired for its own unique attributes?
So I'll tell you that I actually think technology inhibits the ability for the evolution. And here's why. When you hand process out tea, the really getting in there and feeling the leaf and pushing it be further beyond gives you such an intimate understanding of the varietal and of each stage and step. I know this from a couple of people that do exclusively hand processing in Hawaii. So they produce all their Hawaiian teas by themselves, and obviously they don't have that generational knowledge. But the hand processed teas tend to do way better, tend to really have an elevated quality because that person is really dealing with the leaf. Sometimes I think mechanization can be a bit of a crutch and will allow people to get to good tea really fast, but won't allow people to it'll get them 90% to great, but that other 10%, you kind of miss out by not doing that initial step of really digging into those cultivars and what those particular plants need in order to express themselves best. And so where you have all that ground game of doing hand processing for so many years and generations, I think that's why you see this like separation. But mechanization can help you get from like no tea to good tea pretty quickly. But I don't necessarily think that the technology has really come far enough along to take people who don't have experience and understanding in that like intimate knowledge from good to great. I mean, remember when we were in China and you're just watching the processor just pick up the leaf and smell it. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to time it, or I'm like measuring my sundial to know when I'm going to go from solar withering to indoor withering, or indoor withering to like a firing step, right? He was just smelling the leaf, throwing it down, smelling the leaf, throwing it down. It was very intuitive. It was very, it was more art form than anything else whenever I've gone and seen processing be done. Now, then when you go to a mechanized facility, it's like almost all like science and specific timing. And so I just think there's a bit of art form that gets lost. And that's the difference between good and great.
So I think I think we're going to definitely pick at that a little bit more because I'm interested. I think maybe Jason, Ryan, you probably have a take, but let's try and do this comparison real quick, and we're going to come back to technology. Is it improving tea? Is it making it good? Can it make it great? But for now, let's say B versus D. What's everyone's thoughts? I think we're going to throw it to, actually, you know what? Let's throw it to Nancy first to give us her opinion, but don't give us a vote yet. And we'll kind of go around from there.
So I started with D first. It actually comes off pretty mellow to me, and almost a little bit basic. Has some sweetness and some creamy notes, but then the aftertaste is very dry, and my entire mouth is very dry. And there's some green notes in there as well. For B, it was a little bit more complex to me. There was a nice roast notes. It was a little bit more balanced. And while it was still a little dry, I also had appetite to drink more.
Very nice. All right. Ryan, any thoughts on either of these?
I thought these were very similar blends, and they are both in composition and in flavor. So you really had to pick apart the differences. I thought D was actually a slightly better blend, especially like the smell of the spoon after I consumed it was a little more fragrant. I thought B was a little bit more muted than D. Both were balanced, light, simple, but I had my preferences leaned closer to D.
Chris?
I actually like D because I'm a bit of an astringency hound. So I actually thought it was to the prior point. Yes, it was drier in the mouth, like the finish, but I sort of like that sort of thing. So so I really did like D. I actually agree with the idea that it was a little bit more simple and not necessarily as complex when I'm tasting, but I found that the aromatics on the nose were actually kind of more complex from my perception. So, but B had a really interesting flavor, and I could really kind of pick out the elements of the underlying raw materials, which I found interesting, even though there were these like very small, minute kind of like changes and elements in there. So, and I do agree with both. I thought this was these two were much closer in kind of philosophy of blending than the first set, which was like, felt like opposite ends of the spectrum. And so, yeah, it'll be a tough choice. I'm still deciding.
This was so much closer. Like A and C, you taste it and you're like, obvious difference. B and D in both color, aroma, and flavor profile, they are much closer. For me, D comes off surprisingly dye like, and I did get a little bit of a flatness kind of in the mid palate, but it turned nice and sweet towards the end. I think that was maybe that astringency biting in the beginning and then going sweet. I personally leaned a little bit more towards B though, as I did find it a little more complex and enjoyed it a little bit more. But just really blown away by how similar they are versus the first set. Jason, your thoughts, and then we're going to go to votes.
I do think that they're very similar. They're both 1.5 Jingmai, the second highest being Manjuan. Oh, well, actually on D it's Kunlu, and then Manjuan, whereas in B it's Manjuan, and then equal parts Huang Kunlu. I think they're very similar. I got a musty, leathery, woody notes from B and the flavor, but a fruity and soft aroma. I had a single sip when the tea was still fairly hot that had a really uncomfortable funk and kind of a sharp aftertaste, but then it just totally blew off. So it was there for like one sip, and I thought, oh, this is going to be super easy. I'm definitely going to like D more. And then as I've gone back to them, he doesn't have that anymore. I don't think it was my imagination, but I just think that blew up. On D, I got a slightly smoky note, a punchy and strong aroma. It has a soft and uplifting flavor. Like, it's actually I find it quite comfortable to drink. I find that it has a good structural bitterness, that the mouthfeel and everything on D is quite nice. Since we're gonna vote.
Yep, put it to a vote. Go for it, Jason.
I'm very tempted to say D, but I do wanna. Yeah, definitely D.
D. Chris?
Close.
D.
But it's super close. D.
Yeah, they're real close, but I'd probably go with D as well.
Ryan?
E, yeah, as well.
D. All right, Nancy.
That'd be the opposite. I'll pick B.
That's good. You shouldn't go along with everyone else's opinions.
Nancy is an independent judge, and she votes against the group on every vote so far.
That's good. Good. We need someone to, shake things up. And it can make a difference, right? Because even though all of us, except for me, are voting, only 3 of your votes are going to count. So let me just tally this up real quick. Ooh, actually, so only 2 of your votes count because two of the tasters' blends are in here. So Nancy, as well as 1 other vote, is in, which means it's a tie. This didn't happen in the last one. How do we want to go about this precedent? Should I be the tiebreaker?
Be the tiebreaker. You still take the teas, so
I can taste these.
it's not your tea, so
Yeah.
you can be the tiebreaker.
Puts a lot of responsibility on me. I actually, Nancy, agree with you. I preferred B. D had a nice, there was a nice comfortableness to it. But B gave me a complexity that I enjoyed a little bit more, and I didn't quite find the same level of off notes I think that everyone else did. I'm not an astringency lover, and there was just a little bit more of a bite on D that I did not like. So sorry to go against the group, but I actually like B more, and I don't want to because there's more tea to measure out. But I actually like B more. All right.
I appreciate the lack of measurement bias here.
It was my 100% pure opinion. So it looks like D was a group favorite, but B is going through. All right. So we made it through the semifinals, and we're going to the finals here. We're going to have C versus B. All right. So we're going to take a little bit of time to measure everything out. I think as we come back, I want to revisit that technology conversation, but we'll take a little break to measure. Oh, sorry. I said B versus C. It's A. You guys all voted A. Sorry.
Trying to shortchange A, Patrick.
Take an A out of the competition. Just, maybe I've got a bias there. I was just trying to cut it down.
That's just arbitrarily picking the winners.
Yeah, no, I'm going to pick who I like the most.
And we're going to pick D. We put A versus B, and D's the winner.
Do you guys need the recipes again?
No, I have them written down, and they're all in the chat.
Yep. So just for everyone's reference, A, 2.1 grams Jingmai, 0.6 grams Manjuan, 0.3 grams Kunlu. So 2.1, 0.6, 0.3. B, 1.5 grams Jingmai, 0.75 grams Manjuan, 0.375 grams Kunlu, 0.375 grams Oolong. So Jason, did you have any thoughts on that technology being a barrier to reaching great tea? Technology, being a lever to reach, nothing to good really fast. What's your thoughts?
Oh, I totally agree. I think that was a great way of thinking about it. The majority of technological developments in tea production have been reductions in manual labor that increase overall, that decrease costs, that increase volume, and as part of that tend to decrease quality. I think the very few exceptions to that rule are things where quality of life improvements for tea farmers yield better tea. So one example of that is the introduction of electricity in many places that allows tea production to go on overnight, particularly in high roasted Taiwanese high mountain oolongs. Being able to have, being able to see your tea production, not needing to light fires or gas lamps, candles, these things are minor, but they're likely to improve quality of life for the farmer and thus likely to make the tea production better. I think that introduction of electricity to Taiwanese high mountain oolong and the use of refrigerators for certain types of withering has yielded new styles of tea that weren't previously possible. Obviously not traditional in the traditional sense, but Taiwanese high mountain oolong tea has really only been around since the 80s anyway. And refrigerators are very traditional 80s technology, and they taste great. So, I think with very few distinct exceptions, you'll notice that none of those technologies that I mentioned increase production volume, right? It's not mechanization technology. It's technology that allows for new things. The one final example is that, obviously I prefer traditional charcoal roast. I prefer hardwood roasts. I prefer that type of low and slow traditional roasting methods. But there are electric roasts, particularly electric toasting in Taiwanese high mountain oolong tea, where the farmer doesn't want any roast at all, just tiny toasting and drying and preservation, that produce beautifully floral teas that wouldn't otherwise be possible. That would just be marred by any hint of smoke or charcoal or anything. It wouldn't be possible to do a roast that light. So generally agreed. I think like the few specific points are so few and far between that we don't even really think of them as tea technology. They're just general technologies that were adopted.
And that was exactly where I was going to go, is like, those technologies I completely agree with your sentiment on those technologies. However, I wouldn't necessarily classify them as tea technology because they aren't specific to tea. They're specific to, no one went in and said, hey, I'm going to create alternating current so that I can, have tea be withered overnight. You know what I mean? Like, it's
That's not
just
what they
tea
were
production.
thinking?
So that's where I think sometimes I think exclusively in terms of like tea specific technologies. But your point is certainly well taken.
I'm going to jump into brewing. You guys ready?
Water is almost boiling. I might be a minute behind you guys.
I'm already. I'm these big tumbler. These big.
I heard your timer go off, man. I knew you were already done. I mean, you've got nice, bun kettles, hot water ready to go, just boiling out of tap. Us plebeians over here have to, either use our electric kettle or get the water to boil in the tetsubin.
I'll make sure to stick my pinky out while I taste.
It's good though that Ryan and Jason, they're both boiling water with tetsubin, so they're getting, maybe more similar results. They've also got, I'm guessing you're using similar water, right? Are both of you
We're both using New York water, although Ryan has a secondary filtration system that he keeps insisting that I buy. He's so insistent that I'm pretty sure it's going to be like their holiday gift soon.
Well, what, Christmas isn't so far away, or Hanukkah for you, but
holiday.
Well, Chris and I are basically using the same water. It's Seattle water, although Chris's is going through, the Starbucks Support Center's water filtration system, and mine is not. Ryan, did you have any further thoughts on, technology and its impacts on tea, as far as, improving tea, a detriment to tea, just to kind of close out the conversation?
No, no immediate thoughts. It's kind of cool, more tertiary, that, we can replicate various forms of water quality. So you'll see groups, especially in coffee, like companies like Third Wave Water, where we'll send out little mineral packets, and you can replicate experiences around the world. And the fact that you can do that at scale for cheap is pretty cool from a brewing perspective and a consumer and enthusiast perspective. So things like that also, didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. So having those innovations come into the consumer experience is pretty cool.
And that kind of reframes the technology question too. So we kind of looked at it more from an industry and a production perspective, and not necessarily from a consumption perspective. So like from a consumption perspective, the new technologies, which is, teapots, pressure, cold brew, things like that. Not that these things are too far out of the realm of possibility. I think add an accessibility to tea, and on the consumer side are actually real high value adds, because it makes it a way more accessible for people to drink and consume and enjoy good tea in various ways fairly easily.
Yeah, I think the end consumer piece definitely makes a lot of sense. Technology has definitely changed the way people can drink tea. I think maybe more so than the way it's changed the industry in the way that people make tea. Because I think the biggest, mechanization we've seen around tea has certainly been for commodity tea, and none of us are really drinking commodity tea. But our lives have definitely been impacted by end user technologies that have made it easier for us to enjoy tea at a higher caliber.
Absolutely.
I'm pouring these out, and they're looking a little bit more similar again, color wise. I think A is just ever so slightly still darker. So I think, Jason's going to be a little bit behind us, but Chris, you're just meeting Jason and Ryan today. I don't think you've listened to the podcast probably, right? You haven't read along with the book. Is there any questions you have while you're drinking tea with us here? Any thoughts going through your head?
It's so funny. Side note, before I jump into my questions, I figured out who everybody's letter was. But as it relates to like tea drinking, where are the places that you've had the most richly like enlivening tea experiences? Like what are those moments? Like if you could give me like 2 moments that just really enriched and enlivened your tea journeys, what would those be?
The most immediate one is probably in Taiwan. From it, other than like lessons from teachers, going to Wisteria Tea House was really special. Just seeing the tea service in action like that was really cool. It was the first time I'd ever been exposed to that in the East. And before that, when we were at Penn State, we ran a student-operated tea house, and we had no benchmark. I had no framework for how anyone does that, other than what I had picked up from Pat and Jason, who were there before me. So seeing that and how they approached it, I remember when I was with another group of people. So we were like, okay, what are they doing here that we can replicate? What's working? What's not working? So that was really cool. It was a really rich experience.
Jason?
Well, just because I'm into one-upsmanship, Pat, when you and I were in Wisteria and we got to have tea with the team master of Wisteria, Cho Yu, when he decided to break out his no-label original Hongyan, and he invited us into him and a group of monks, Buddhist monks. And it was a little unclear why we were invited, other than Cho Yu really just wanted us to experience Hongyan with him. He invited us, we had 2 brews, and then he dismissed us back to our table.
Yeah, hey guys.
I've never heard that part of the story.
He's amazing. He's a great guy. Very rich in tea knowledge too. So that's awesome. The Wisteria brings very many happy memories of travels to Taiwan for sure.
I think Chris, we've drank so much tea together, and we've talked about tea memories and everything for sure. I'm just trying to think of one to share that would be at least add some depth, things that people haven't heard on the podcast before. I think
The one
for
that comes to mind, I'm going to jump in here. The one that comes to mind is actually a humbling experience when we went into that tea shop in Korea and were basically dismissed out of the tea shop without getting to buy or enjoy or taste any tea whatsoever, only to then later go back.
on social. So yeah. So I'll just add on to that story. So Jason, you know the shop that we had went to with Brother Anthony in Onguk, right?
Yes.
I remembered where the store was, and I'm like, all right, Chris and I were there, I don't know, April 2019, something like that. And we go in, and like, you know, we try and just, we're looking around, trying to kind of express that we want to drink tea. She doesn't speak English, and we don't speak Korean. And she kind of stared at us until we left. We go back the next day, 2 days later, with Brother Anthony. And then, of course, we have an amazing time. You know, he's like, oh, Brother Anthony's telling her, you know, I brought Patrick here, I don't know, 8 years ago, 9 years ago. Do you remember him? And we had some mind-blowing tea. She served us like a, you know, gushu pu'er of some sort. I think it was a yu that just like, I was actually pretty sick on that trip. I had some kind of cold or fever. And that tea like was the only thing that got through to me that day. Like I couldn't taste anything at all. And that tea just relieved like all my sinus pressure. My headache was gone. I felt so good. And it just like blew me away. And Chris was just floating on another planet too. But that definitely was humbling. You know, we go in and just like, I don't know you, I'm not going to serve you guys tea, and show up again with Brother Anthony. And then it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like we're here for tea. So that's goes to kind of show the cultural capital required to have tea at some places.
Once again, to the point, it's like, it's nice being around the industry for as long as I've been around the industry. A lot of people can get this like inflated sense of self and their tea knowledge and things like that. And so I've come to really appreciate those moments where I'm like humbled to recognize that I'm like a speck of dust within this like greater tea culture relative to like all of these, you know, masters and teachers and processors and people who know things that, you know, I'll spend an entire lifetime trying to figure out these certain aspects of the information and knowledge. So yeah,
some people are so deep in one corner, right, that you're never going to get there. You just take what you can from their corner and apply it to yours. But I think, you know, going on one very specific memory for me that was extremely formative was processing tea and staying with Mr. Hong for a week. That was the first time I handpicked and processed tea. And I don't really think you can understand tea until you try and make it yourself. I think there is not to be exclusionary to anyone who, you know, loves tea and hasn't made it. I just think that it really unlocks a level of understanding that is very hard to replicate if you don't have that experience. It was extremely formative for me.
Were you able to experience taste it in intermediate steps as well?
I don't really think we did, actually. Jason, I don't know if you remember any of that, but I think, you know, we picked. We did get to taste, you know, that tea being made into fresh Korean pancakes. Yep. So he did make the pancakes with the tea. What's the name of those pancakes? I'm trying to remember.
I don't remember, but I've had raw tea a couple times, and it always is shocking how different it tastes if you're trying to eat it like a vegetable.
Yeah.
Kind of like a cross between spinach and really spicy arugula.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, we masticated it, right? We ate it in some food, but it wasn't like we did a wither, brewed it. We did a pan fry, brewed it. So I think that definitely would have been useful too. But no, we picked the tea. We stayed through the whole processing of the tea. And we actually got to process 2 different kinds of tea, right? So we got to make a green tea and a balio cha. And it was just, you know, at that time, balio cha was not understood in the West at all. And still kind of just getting there. You're starting to see a lot of tea influencers and everything starting to make posts and share about it. But it was still at that point where like I could only find one article online to reference. And I finally got to, you know, hands-on make it, which really helped solidify my understanding of not just balio cha, but tea in general. So that was an extremely formative experience.
Yeah, I would say that probably the most formative experience that I had, and this was after I'd already been doing tea for for a bit, but being able to taste the intermediate steps in oolong production in Nantao was utterly fascinating. Like we go up onto the garden, and we pluck it, and he's like, "Oh, we're gonna taste this later," and just like throws the few leaves in the back of his trunk and like withers them all day in like the trunk of his car in a basket. And then we just go and at the end of the day we go and taste it, and we pulled off I asked if I could pull off some of the post-indoor withered tea, and then obviously we tasted some of the finished product, not from the same years, but obviously from the same plants, same garden. And that was such an informative experience to like how I like reframed oolong as this like journey where you like taste the tea in reverse order of processing, and you taste the finishing steps first, and then as you continue to brew and brew and brew and brew, you're actually tasting them, kind of tasting it backwards to the cultivarietal, which is like when you're, you know, at the end point, you've gassed out the tea, or, you know, whatever term you use for being done with it, like you're tasting that raw cultivar is the last thing that you taste, but you get to kind of have this interesting journey through the reverse journey through the production.
Yeah, unfolding all the processing steps as you brew. It's definitely a really unique way to think about it. I think everyone looks like they still have more they want to add on to it, but I think we are definitely getting ready to vote on this stuff. So we'll go around with thoughts on A and B. So maybe Ryan, do you want to start with your thoughts on A and B?
Yeah. So this solidified my love of A. I think of all four, it's has the really nice astringency that stands out from the rest, and it's probably the most complex. I think it's the best summary of 1 + 1 = 3. Very balanced, really nice time intensity. And it has a personality. There's some, you know, it has memorable characteristics, and it's less of a really balanced, simple blend. So I really liked A. I really like the fragrance on B as well, but I think the blend muted a lot of the characteristics that I liked in A.
It sounds like you're already giving your vote, but we'll go on to Chris.
I would agree with that. Sometimes I've used this term. Sometimes there's subtraction in too much addition. So too many ingredients coming together does kind of mute a lot of the uniqueness of each of the elements coming together. I think what I really love about A, besides that like beautiful way that the astringency comes through, is that I love how it has like this very distinctive perspective that it's approaching. And that's what I really enjoyed about like the AC comparison, is like it was like this very distinctive, like two completely different methodologies kind of going toe to toe. And certainly I love the distinctness of this perspective, and really enjoy this cup of tea. B is good. Like honestly, all four of them I would drink like happily and have no problem. But when we're trying to get into those, like, you know, less than a 0.1% difference between things, I think that when you look at B, yeah, there's, you know, just a little bit too much of everything, maybe. But from an aromatic perspective, I think that that's what elevates B a little bit for me. But for me, yeah, A has just such like a clear perspective that I really enjoy it.
All right, Jason and Nancy.
For me, I think two things are going on. One is I think I'm getting palate fatigued. And two, I think that with B, which was the most complex blend and the hardest to measure out because it does things like 0.375 grams, and my scale goes to tenths of a gram. So I think the last time I got less lucky with the leaves than this time, because the leaves that I measured out were maybe better tasting leaves, because B tastes a whole lot better to me this time. A, I got from the hot leaves. Pre-brew, I got woody, dark, and musty. I find it still soft and easy to drink. There's a little bit of a cotton candy sweetness which resonates on the aftertaste. B, I find a whole lot more structural. The aroma is fruity, round, nice, but there's a woody and tannic leather backbone to it. Pretty hard to say which one I prefer. I think I keep going back and forth. Stylistically, I think I prefer B, but yeah, I was predisposed against B too, but I think B wins for me.
Nancy?
I think I like B, but A comes off as, I don't really like the strong astringency notes. It's a little too much for me. It is a softer tea, so I can appreciate some of the softer, milder notes in there. And B just has, like Jay said, more structure. Kind of tastes a little bit more complex to me. There's some bitter, there's some sweet. It's just kind of balanced, more balanced, I think.
Okay. And so for me, I think I enjoyed the depth that A had. I think the profile just leaned a little bit sweeter, deeper, richer. But I kind of agree with what Jason said. I think B didn't stand out as much last time, even though I did vote for it to go forward. I did like it more. It does taste better this time. And as you said, I don't know if that's palate fatigue, the leaves, right? None of our scales go to the thousandth place. So I'm sure we have a little bit more variance on that blend than the other ones. But I did enjoy it a lot more this time than I did the previous time. So I think with that, we'll go to votes. So Ryan?
A for me.
Chris?
I'll go with A as well.
Jason?
B.
Nancy?
E.
All right. So you've got A, B, B. Based on who's participating,
B wins.
B wins.
B wins.
A actually does get my vote, but A is my blend.
Congratulations, Ryan. You
Look at that.
So Ryan is our winner. I'll reveal all of the blends while Ryan basks in glory. A was my blend, B is Ryan's, C is Chris, and D is Jason's. So, kind of by an upset, the underdog wins because we outed you in the beginning, Ryan, by accident because you're the only one that used Boulong. You made it through the first round. You were up against Jason's blend, and you made it through based on my vote. And I was my own downfall because you came up against me, and your vote didn't count since you were participating. My vote doesn't count. Jason and Nancy cinched it for you, so you can go ahead. Send them your check. Send them the $500 or a couple cakes of Hongyan, 2007 Wisteria Hongyan to pay them off. But no, good job. I think it was awesome to taste all these blends, see how these four Malcha can kind of be transformed in so many different ways, and also just really interesting to see how I think a lot of our preferences, even if we approach it differently, our preferences all kind of show. We all really heavily leaned on that Jingmai. The only one who didn't have Jingmai as the dominant tea in the blend was actually Chris, and that was just by 5%. So he had a little bit more Kunlu, but the rest of us went 50% Jingmai or more. And so really the big differentiation was that Ryan threw a little Boulong, and maybe that's what cinched it. I think, what did you guys think as you drank each tea individually? Myself, Chris, Jason, all of us chose to let the Boulong stay out of the blend. So what did you think of the tea individually?
They have a range of qualities. This may be the kindest way of putting that. I think the Jingmai is the highest quality of them, which is why we all relied so heavily. Most of us relied so heavily on it. The Manjuan is also. I enjoyed the Manjuan and the Kunlu. The Kunlu is actually also quite good.
So it's so funny because when I did my blends, I can't help but think of like the like typical not heavy pu'er drinker when I'm creating blends. So like that was exactly what I went with. And I knew that I wasn't going to get my own vote because I figured that at some point, if I was up against Pat, I would have a tea that I probably personally preferred more. But I was interested in could you take teas that ostensibly are potentially individually polarizing and make them like super duper like mellowed out and accessible for people who may or may not drink pu'er, you know, actively.
I think
So-
you did that, because Nancy was the anti-vote on everything.
Yeah, I think
So-
Nancy did vote for yours, actually. So you definitely hit your goal and your philosophy. I think mine was very much the opposite of what you said, right? I knew the people were drinking. I know you're drinking it. I know Jason's drinking it. I knew Ryan is drinking it. I didn't know Nancy was drinking, which is good that she did. But, you know, once again, Nancy, the anti-vote, it definitely is interesting because I just went with that philosophy of knowing my audience and trying to hit a preference and a profile they would like. So it may really be that Ryan's not only, you know, won our hearts, but might win, you know, the broader market's hearts as well. So Ryan, I think we're going to have, you know, you and Glenn, maybe if we can get them, have a little showdown with these 4 Maucha and your recipe. So he already knows your recipe since we're talking about it here. So he might really come prepared to, you know, wipe the table with you. But I think we all want to take a second and just give Ryan a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
You're the winner. You'll get your check in the mail. And, you know, any kind of closing thoughts on this exercise, guys? You know, what do you think it did for you? Did it, you know, kind of elucidate anything with these teas for you? Just kind of last thoughts.
I think I'm going to go back to single origin.
Yeah, each Maucha made you love single origin that much, or blending made you hate blending that much?
Yeah, I think I think that there's a secondary reason that so much of the contemporary pu'er production is single origin. You know, all you have to do is find the right source, and you don't have to worry about ruining it yourself. And so, you know, particularly some of the Western vendors that are going into Yunnan and sourcing very high-end, good, rare tea, right? It's the same reason why lots of Taiwanese high mountain Oolong farmers are not roasting their tea. Like, why take the risk? You know, so I say that jokingly. I mean, go back to single origins, but I did think that this was quite hard, and I thought the interactions were certainly not what I expected when I started.
Chris, any thoughts?
Yeah, I love this exercise. And I always think it really does hone in on your skills every single time you taste, obviously. But in this particular exercise, it's picking out notes. When you do the single origin thing, I think that everything has that like almost extreme distinction, whereas in a blend, it's like, okay, what do I want to highlight, and what percentage at which do I want to highlight it? And so it really gets you thinking about how things come together, and it's a bit of a different frame of reference from, you know, typical just what I would do daily drinking tea.
I think I'll provide my thoughts, and then we'll close out with the reigning champion of our blend off to kind of send us home. But I definitely found it like super fascinating. You know, you taste each of these teas in so many different ways. You get those unique characters of each origin, but really getting them to sing together is a huge challenge. And I think just my hat's off to all those vendors who, you know, cinch it every time, from their low cost blends to their high class blends. You know, there's some individuals who just do an amazing job, and it just kind of shows me how much work really has to go into that. So appreciate them, their tongues, their stomachs for putting up with so much blend work. And Ryan, our champion, take it away, man. Your closing thoughts, and then just send us home.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that this was an incredibly hard exercise. And that, you know, it's interesting. I really don't like any of these teas on their own other than the Jingmai. So I decided that was going to be the heart of my blend, and how can I incorporate some of these other profiles and the time intensities and the characteristics to add layer onto the Jingmai. But it is kind of amazing the range of profiles you can get from 4 different Malchas that are not drastically different, except for the Jingmai, which is a bit older. So just some interesting characteristics. But no, couldn't agree more. This is really hard. And I'm much happier as a consumer than as a blender.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us in this edition of TeaTechnique Editorial Conversations. This has been a bonus episode on tea blending.
Thanks for listening. Woo! Go Ryan.